Okay, we are now live on YouTube with the August 26th edition of the Node.js modules team. We have 6 people on the call today and a pretty full agenda, so let's just get right to it. The first thing that we have on here, which we're putting in the announcements section, is Christopher Hiller has joined us today with some questions regarding a Twitter thread last week. Chris, would you like to kick it off?
Sure. So I just wanted to bring up something that's been tossed around before, and it's still kind of an issue, and that is doing module level mocking in tests using ESM. And of course, with the CommonJS and requires and the cache and all that, you can do this sort of thing pretty dynamically. There are modules out there like Proxy Quire or Rewire Mock, or even maybe back in the day, I think Rewire. And they do this sort of thing. They work with CommonJS. It's nice to be able to just kind of swap out a module and just kind of mock it and for isolation purposes. And ESM kind of makes this difficult. Now, I've seen a couple loader implementations out there that allow you to do this sort of thing. I haven't had time to play around with them, so I'm not sure exactly how sufficient they are. But I know that there's at least one challenge where it's the requirement of using the loader flag at all, because we don't necessarily know if we're going to start mocking things or when we're going to mock things, and we don't. And as it's implemented now, you can only have one loader, right? And so if you want to use 2 loaders, maybe you want to use something that, I don't know what people use loaders for, TypeScript or something, right? And you want to have that loader, and then you want to have this other loader that does the mocking for you. Well, you're not going to be able to do that because there's only one single loader. Now, I understand there's something in the works or being considered about like chaining loaders, which would help. Still, that kind of puts a lot of, I guess, responsibility on the user or the test runner. So a test runner like Mocha, it may need to start spawning a sub process for all tests, even if you don't specifically want to use this loader, because the only way to get it at all, I mean, it's like Mocha would have to like install it by default, or you would have to use Node and then a loader and then Mocha, and it becomes not very ergonomic. But it would be cool, just like pie in the sky, is if there was a way to use a loader and just like do it from code and say, okay, hey, I want to load this here module, but I want to use this particular loader. I don't want to have to go and add a loader flag every time. That can be difficult. I don't know, might be able to work around it. As I said, you could spawn sub processes and make that happen. And Mocha does things like this, but it doesn't want to necessarily if it doesn't need to. So it's just kind of awkward. And I saw that, and I wonder if this gist URL that Guy pasted in the chat can get into the minutes, but I haven't had a chance to look through this thread with Matteo and Guy here. But it sounds like he was, I don't know. There's definitely challenges here, and so I'm kind of just trying to figure out. All right, is this something that we think we could eventually work around? Are there things going forward that, or coming down the pipe, that may make this less difficult for people to do, or would something like a programmatic API to enable a loader just be like completely not feasible, or would it be a security risk, or what have you? And so I just kind of want to understand what the modules team's feeling is about this sort of thing, and if they foresee a solution to make it more like what we had with CommonJS, because I mean, there's really no other way to put it. It's just that it's the experience is kind of downgraded, and I realize that's because of the spec, right? The spec is not wanting you to do all sorts of loosey-goosey things, but it's something that people writing tests in Node have come to rely on. So I just kind of wanted to take a poll, and or maybe not an actual poll, but I wanted to see what people thought about this problem.
Anyone have anything to add here?
So, okay, let me just ask a question. So is it possible at some point to do something like enable, I don't know what the loader flag does under the hood, but I want to specify, let's use this loader, and I want to do that in the script instead of on the command line. Is that possible to add some sort of API in Node to do this? And if it's possible, but it's undesirable, why is it undesirable?
I feel like Bradley has the answer to that question. There's definitely some security concerns, although I feel like those would be addressed through policies rather than forcing people to use flags. I don't know.
I mean, so I mean, yeah. I mean, if you can do the same sort of thing that a loader does with the require system now, I mean, I don't know.
Oh, I remember the last time we talked about this, and someone, I feel like I'm not saying this very well. So if someone else is on the call or remembers better than me, please tell me to shut up and explain this better. But the reason I remember being brought up was as of now, we don't have like package scoped loaders. So like, you know how like the type field follows like package scope, like it applies to that package and any subfolders under that until you find the next package. If we allowed, loaders through configuration files, say, the obvious place to put that configuration would be in package.json. We don't really have any other, I mean, there's policies.json, I guess, but I'm not aware of any other like node config files that we have at the moment. So if it were to be in package.json, then the question would be like, well, now is it on a per package level, like a particular child package could load, say, the TypeScript loader, but that would only apply to that package. And then how do we enforce that? It gets messy. If it's not package scoped, then it's sort of like we have to introduce the concept of there being like the root package.json, which is like, where's the main entry point for the node process? What's the controlling package.json for that main entry point? What does it have defined as what loaders should be loaded? And then those get loaded to the application. But the problem there is that, well, if you're already doing all that, then like you could put in your npm start command for running your node program, whatever flags you want. So it's really like what you're asking for is like a per package based loaders. And I think that's had resistance in the past.
It wouldn't be per package. It would be like per module. And it would want to be,
I mean,
dynamically.
What are you defining as module is different than package?
So just, I want to interrupt for a second, just from a timing perspective. This was not something that was put on the agenda before, and we do have quite a few other items on the agenda. and we're already at almost 20 minutes past the hour. Guy has their hand up, and Wes also pointed out something for debugger.setScriptSource that potentially could work for modules. So I just want to quickly check and just let folks know. I think we should close this at 20 minutes. And then, Christopher, if you'd like to have further discussions about this, either maybe add the agenda label, or we can add the agenda label to the hot reload modules issue that Wes pointed out, or you should open a new issue to discuss so we can have it on the agenda and have it kind of like fairly stacked rank with the other content that we have to discuss.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I realize I'm coming in here and, you know, taking your time, but I want to thank everybody for letting me do so. But yeah, Jeffrey, but what I mean by module is,
yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the point of order there, because we do have a standard process for creating agenda items and managing these discussions. And there are items on the agenda this week that were on last week that we had to skip over because we ran out of time. And now we've used 20 minutes of today's meeting discussing a topic that's
I will take it to the issue. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. So moving to the agenda, we do have one item lower on the.
I can just add a couple more things to it. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but it's just when it's brought up to already a third of the meeting and then we're continuing to discuss, that was my main sort of point of order. To point to two other things briefly on the topic. One is, I believe Marco does start new processes already when you run it. And the other one is there might be ways in which we can allow something like Realm's construction of subloaders in the execution environment, but that would be very similar to starting a new process. But let's get some discussions going on that out of band and with Bradley involved possibly as well.
Okay, thank you, Guy. The first item I want us to get to really quickly is add Duran Sur as observer. This is an issue that has been open for 18 days, which is, in my personal opinion, not very fair. We have got on here 5 members of the team, and plus Jan.
There's like a
Jeff, I'm going to mute you. No offense. We've got 5 members of the team who are on this call right now. Jeffrey, Guy, Jordan, Wes, and myself. And with Jan having approved this PR, that makes 6, which is quorum-ish. Does anyone object to us just landing this and moving it forward? Because we just have not had quorum the last couple of meetings, which might be something independently that we need to follow up on as a group. So I'd like to just land Duran's. So anyone have any objections? No, great. Duran, welcome to the team. Thanks for being patient and apologies that took so long.
No worries.
I'll sort this out and get you added to everything right now. Okay, so adding a note there. Done. Added. Yeah, Jordan, I'm going to go through and do something like that anyways. And I may also modify the governance to set like a 2-week time box for nominations. So we can come back to that. So Guy, you did mention that we have things on the agenda that we didn't get to last week. or 2 weeks ago, I'm spacing about which specific ones they were because they get sorted not based on that order. Which item would you say?
It was the import maps and Node.js one that was on last week. But specifically, we also have 2 that have been ongoing that are still unresolved, which are exports detection and the subcath patterns. But just that it is a packed agenda, really. So.
Okay, so I think with that in mind, the modify ESM experimental loader hooks, is that one that we can maybe skip for right now? Does anyone have a problem with that to just move on to these other agenda items? Okay.
I don't believe we have Julian or Jan here today, so that makes sense.
Okay, so we'll just skip. The special treatment for package JSON resolution and exports. We've talked about that extensively on the last couple meetings. So how about we table that one for right now and come back to it if we have time? Okay, so the next one we have is CJS exports detection. Do we want to get into this one?
We can do it.
I'd like to talk about that one. I don't know if anyone can find Gus and see if he can join. But Guy, did you want to start? It's your thing.
Sure, and thanks for joining, Jeffrey. I was concerned if you weren't going to make it today. But yeah, maybe last week we discussed this without you present, and we're running off of the numbers that you provided and then also putting them into context so far as what the criteria are considered for the success of this kind of thing. And we kind of came to a sort of a rough sort of point that the definition, like it seems like the problem is defining the criteria for success and getting agreement between Gus and yourself. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to that at all further.
Sure. Okay. So the more I look into this, the more I feel like you can basically define your way into success or failure, essentially. Like if you want this PR to succeed, you can, as I've done, define success criteria that make it work, or you can do otherwise. It's really like an open question, whether users consider this feature to be broken or not, essentially, is something we don't have a clear sense of, and I would judge whether we're successful on this is whether or not like users open tickets to the Node, GitHub repo saying like, oh, this is broken for such and such, right? And so the question is like, are they going to do that? They're already doing it for the current default only approach. So I view the idea that we should just do nothing, to me, feels like a very low, like we can do better than that. The PR does do better than that. So I don't feel like we should stop there. Then the question, so what's the question to me is like, the fewest number of tickets are going to get opened is basically the most packages that we can successfully detect these exports from. And I don't think that there's much value in like a very bright line, clear definition of like, it works in these cases and not in these cases, therefore your tickets are invalid. I think we should just try to make it work in for as many packages as we can, as many cases as we can. And the explanation to users is like, we make a best effort attempt at static analysis. For the ones we can statically analyze and find the names, we support it. Otherwise we don't. That's the best we offer to you. If you want it to be sorted, supported, the named exports for a particular package to be supported, don't complain to Node, go complain to the package author and get them to add an ESM wrapper for your package. And that's kind of how I would treat this. Like, I feel like that's what users would most want. They want it to work as much of the time as possible. So the most we can provide for them, we should, is kind of how I feel about it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it seems like you and Gus need to have a discussion here further, possibly. I mean, have you spoken with him at all?
No, I haven't had the time, and he hasn't reached out. I can try to reach out to him. I'm not going to block this PR under any version of it. Like, I don't think I've put a blocker on it. I mean, if you can get it to work for ES module in a way that satisfies Gus, then let's merge it in. But I would want another PR that goes further, that like does the original version where it's not limited to transfiled packages, but attempts to do all packages, because I think that's what users want. And I don't care if it's only 60% of such packages and not 90%. Like, I think there are plenty of users that would prefer 60% to 0 of that subset. So, if you can get something that passes Gus's test in order to get this PR merged in, then fine, go for it. And then, you know, we can kind of reopen this with the earlier code and I can haggle with him about that. But I mean, does anyone else on the call have strong opinions either way about this? I mean, does anyone disagree with me?
I guess like one of the places where I come from here is I know that it's less than ideal, and I know that it does to a certain extent make adoption harder. But I can also see where folks are coming from on not being thrilled about like magic that doesn't work all the time. And in fact, like that potentially being worse for people who don't know as much. Like, so if we step back here and it's like if we think about the specific developers that we would be designing this feature for, and please correct me if I'm wrong or summarizing incorrectly, but I really think that like this type of feature that we're talking about creating is one likely for developers who have less familiarity with the module system and less of a extensive understanding of all kind of the edge cases, and aren't necessarily like digging through the docs of everything, so that they can just kind of install things and use them and they just work, as well as folks who are trying to like, you know, convert existing packages that were being transpiled to using native ESM. Well, I think creating a system that allows named exports from CommonJS does help these folks. Having one that is not consistent and then requires them to understand even more rules about when it will work and when it won't work, actually to me could potentially be worse as far as the support story is concerned, because now it's not just like a single rule that they need to learn, which is like CommonJS just doesn't have exports and we can give a clear error. It's like, okay, yeah, like CommonJS doesn't have exports, but if you compiled it with Babel and if it was this way and if it was that shape, then it will work. Like that actually to me is far more confusing, even if it does kind of pave over some of the transitionary use cases.
That's kind of why I would say, like, if you think about what's the user experience right now, is like they try to do a named export, it fails, it gives an error saying like named exports from CJS aren't supported, use this code instead, and it gives them a 2-line snippet of importing the default, destructuring off of it, right? All like say we merged in the most ambitious version of Guy's PR that like gets named exports most of the, you know, for as much as possible. All that would really change from a UX perspective is, well, some named exports would work, but then for the ones that didn't, that error message would just say, instead of saying like only default exports would work from CJS, it would just say named exports for CommonJS packages work only when Node can successfully determine them via static analysis. This package appears to not be, you know, one that Node can understand through static analysis. You can import its exports through by using the default, and then the same 2-line thing. So like we're adding a sentence to the error message essentially, but that's it. Like I don't think we would write any documentation for package authors to let them game the system to get this detection system to work for them. Like if package authors want named exports, we tell them write an ESM wrapper and that's it, you know? So nobody needs to know, like users don't need to, users, both consuming users and package authors don't need to know the details of what's going on under the hood in terms of Guy's magic, I think. I mean, how do you feel about that, Miles?
Well, we've got 3 people with their hands up, so let's let them talk, and then unless anyone objects, I'd like to give another, you know, like let's say 5 minutes for this agenda item, or do you think we need more? Well, let's see where we're at in 5 minutes. Wes?
It's probably worth noting that also at the time that we make the error message, like, because we know that we're already in a module graph with an error, we could easily like just require the module in question to get like the full list of things and say like, we couldn't detect this thing that you referenced, but it does exist, so you do have to say it in this way, like with the default and what have you. Like specialize the error message even further.
Well, I mean, the error message right now gives the named export. It just doesn't verify that it actually exists if the object were destructured. But we totally could expand what's going on right now to improve it. Jordan?
Yeah.
Or-
Okay. So I guess I'm kind of two minds around this. I think that in one case, I would like to improve the ergonomics around this, and for packages that are intended to be used as if they had named exports, it seems, where the author can't write an ESM wrapper, it seems like it would be a really nice thing to just kind of make that work. And especially if the error message can be made even more clear. But on the flip side, decisions, I think I brought this up last week or the week before. We made a lot of design decisions around ESM and Node where to prefer explicitness over convenience and ergonomics. Not that we wanted an unergonomic solution, but that the we'll expect is not our implementation provides. What it provides is observe property that some folks found important. So I guess I'm confused to see the kind of back and forth around the priorities for matching user expectations here. Yeah. That's all.
So, sort of in line with that, one of the things that's also worth discussing is it's a kind of a raising to add the named exports. And then there's like one edge case that does need to be considered quite carefully, and that's whether a default export should be overridden. So if you've got something with the ES module flag and it has a default export, should that default export override the sort of CommonJS default? And that's something that I have been worried about, because if we're telling users, you always import CommonJS as the default, but then sometimes, and it'll always be the module that exports value. And then sometimes it's not in these cases, and users don't necessarily know whether that breaks that sort of invariant of thinking of CommonJS as always the default. And it's worth remembering that default exports were invented for CommonJS for this reason.
I mean,
and then you get this parity mismatch between the systems. So it's a tricky one. I tend to like the guarantee of default always being modular exports, and then the other names are kind of the lifted extras. But I know a lot of people feel the other way, and that's something we do need to also get agreement on if we want to be able to do this stuff and define what it means to do it consistently. But we do also need to move on it soon if we want to. I could get the export star cases finished up for the ES module case, for the ES module lifting, to get it to kind of over Gus's concerns. It would be quite a bit of work. Well, not a huge amount, but it would be some work. So having some agreement or understanding between us on whether we want to do that or not, and how, and if we can get agreement on it, would be useful, not to waste effort there, because it's not something that like is particularly fun. But personally, I would prefer to keep the default semantic. Wesley?
I think it's worth noting that to a package consumer, whether the package is ESM or CJS or LAVM, is completely transparent. And so that saying you import CJS with a default, while that's useful if you're like working inside the package and you're mixing formats yourself, when you're consuming a package, you actually have no idea, except for any documentation the package author may have left you that you've read. And so in that respect, that guidance isn't actually particularly helpful for people consuming packages at all, really.
Yeah, but I mean, like the same level of logic could be used for TypeScript or WebAssembly or other formats. I know that this is a bit of like a stretch, but it's like CommonJS and ESM are different formats. The fact that one supports the other is meant as, you know, like a bridge between them. But I think like, well, I can say like a modules interface, you shouldn't have to know about it. Like people do publish raw TypeScript as modules, and you do need to know that, because if you try to import it or require it, it just won't work.
Are there people who are strongly either way on how we treat the default? Just to go back to that question.
I'm a big fan of consistency.
A consistency with existing transpiler behavior or consistency with ES module behavior? Because those are two different systems which have different opinions here, which is why we're asking.
I would say consistency within our own platform.
Yeah, I agree with Guy on this one, that like I feel like we're gonna, like we had that all that stuff about the hazard, the dual package hazard, that ties directly into this. If like module exports is a different object than, you know, import, it's the same type of thing. Like I feel like we're definitely gonna get bugs if like we suddenly make ES module versions of module exports behave differently.
I think my only thing is, if we are switching the behavior on the presence of the ES module marker in the module, we should follow the behavior that the ES module marker implies to the letter, which includes overriding default.
Well, that's why I'm saying we shouldn't do anything special based on that marker. That's why I've been against this whole effort of Gus's trying to limit this thing to be only affecting packages with that marker.
So should we continue to pursue this or not, I guess is the question. I still like the idea of supporting it for the ES module cases. I do also support extending, like if you think of it as a kind of a lifting and it's not guaranteed, I don't see a problem with that, because it's kind of like, you know, you've got your default is always going to work, but if you're lucky, you might get some named exports, and that seems better than nothing. So like, I kind of agree with Jeffrey like that, but Gus won't allow it. So I'm all for the ES module restriction to get something, because there are a lot of transpiled modules and there's only going to be more and more transpiled modules. So at least that gives us something, and it gives us TypeScript and Babel, and so many packages have ES module on them these days. It's like, it's going to be more and more.
How many transpiled modules are there that are not going to be updated? Because that's really the problem set, right? The ones that are going to be updated, we can just update. We can come up with solutions to actually produce an ES module wrapper in the transpiler, and then just solve that for all future transpiled modules, right?
Sorry, can you just clarify that again?
Yeah, so what I mean is, of all of the transpiled modules out there, some percentage, let's say 80%, are going to continue to be transpiled and updated moving forward, which means that if we investigate and locate a solution in TypeScript and Babel and so forth, then that 80% aren't going to need any special handling from Node. They can just have a generated ESM wrapper that provides the named exports. It's that other 20% that is never going to be updated. And so recognizing the historical ES module marker is the only way to provide named exports to those. So I guess my question is, I said 80-20, what do we think the actual percentage is there? Like how many, because it seems like this feature really is only providing the only way out for that 20%.
I mean, that's sort of like asking how many packages are.
Sorry to interrupt. Quick point of order, two things. Duran has their hand up, A, and
Sorry
B,
about that.
we're over the extended time box that we talked about. And so after Duran adds something, I think it's good for us to gut check and see if we want to move on from this topic or not. Duran?
Just one question. I wonder if some of these problems can be resolved by using some providing a tool that automatically generates, like, covers the edge cases without having to cover it in runtime and creates pull requests for packages and fix them?
I think that that could potentially work for some cases, but where we see things get really weird is when like you have packages that are deep in dependency trees. I guess that's not going to really matter from an import perspective though, because usually you're really only importing something that you're directly depending on.
Anna has written a utility that automatically generates an ESM wrapper for packages. There's certainly nothing stopping someone from integrating that into a package manager like NPM. And then it's like on, NPM install, even all the way down the tree, it generates wrappers. And then, you can import anything and it'll just work. But that's kind of outside the scope of Node, really.
We can create a bot that does pull requests to fix people's code for that. It takes money to run this bot, but basically.
I mean, it also doesn't help for all the people who have packages that are already on their machines,
That's true. That's true.
So, quick time check.
Can I just ask if, say I was able to convince Gus to come around to what I'm proposing. Does anyone else here oppose it? Like, would anyone else object to that? Okay. Would anyone object to the more minimal version that like maybe Guy can get Gus to accept?
I honestly would need to see more numbers and the full user experience before being able to commit to whether or not I would object to something.
Well, that's fine. But like, at least as of now, like in terms of should Guy invest more time into this, like you're not opposed in principle.
I mean, I'm going to be honest. I think that Guy has invested a ton of engineering hours into this, and we've continued to discuss it and not had a ton of progress. And in respect to Guy's time, I don't know if continuing to explore implementation is necessarily, the best use or respectful of that time. If we do, because at least to myself, it doesn't feel like at the end of this discussion, we're any closer than we were at the beginning personally. And we've had this discussion many times. And I'm not trying to be defeatist about it. I'm just trying to be realistic and respectful about the fact that Guy is volunteering his time to do this.
All right, so maybe the step forward is to try to schedule some kind of out-of-band meeting with anyone, with especially with Gus and anyone else who's interested. Does that sound like a next step?
Yeah, I think a dedicated meeting to this topic is necessary with the stakeholders who care about it.
Okay.
Okay, so import maps in Node.js. Guy, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, it's a shame Bradley isn't here this week. So this is quite a big topic, but I guess, so firstly, Doran brought up import maps, I believe. And then, so, it's a question that generally comes up is, should Node.js support import maps? Dino supports import maps and Chrome supports it behind the experimental web platform features flag. And generally the feeling is no, we've got our own module resolution system. If you have a bare package specifier, it's looked up in Node modules. We have our own mechanisms here. That seems fine. I mean, one example is, import maps would offer a kind of a marking system like Christopher was asking about at the beginning of this meeting. They could be a sort of an out-of-band way to define mappings. But the directions that have kind of made me want to bring this up is a few things that have kind of been happening. Firstly, if you look at the Node.js policies implementation, it does import mappings. So Node.js policies map modules in the Node.js core resolver. They're a mapping system. And that was necessary for the security properties of policies. Bradley just merged a PR to add scopes to policies. So policies have both imports and scopes. They have scoped mappings as well, which are both features of import maps. The other thing is that policies do integrity, which import maps don't do. But in System.js, we needed integrity for lazily loaded modules, which wasn't possible any other way. And we ended up adding an integrity field to the import map as the easiest route to provide this information and get guarantees for code execution. And so that was quite interesting that from the System.js side, we support import maps and then we added integrity. And from the Node.js policies side, it's got integrity, which was then turned into import maps. And so this made me think maybe if we consider import maps as a kind of a virtualization of the environment that can provide like the mocking features that Christopher was interested in and things like that. And also possibly even like if it might have security properties or things like that, if, you know, around these use cases, it's something Node.js might want to consider. And furthermore, right now, import maps aren't being actively driven because the environments that most need them are the runtimes like Dino and projects like System.js and stuff like that. And the use cases around browsers aren't that fleshed out. Whereas it might be the new JavaScript runtimes that are able to more utilize import maps. So shouldn't they be steered by the runtimes that need them? So kind of a combination of security thinking, a combination of the use cases around mocking and stuff like that, and defining modules, and whether Node.js might be able to say, you know what, as a project, we have an interest in the future of the specification, and as a project, we should be a part of defining that specification, or at some level embracing it, or is there a security standards group or something that Node.js could get involved in with it at some level? Just trying to think about how to structure that stuff and whether it makes sense for there to be any type of representation or endorsement. Jordan?
Yeah, so I have my hand up. It's worth noting that in order for built-in modules, the language proposal to be unblocked, some sort of import-like mechanism needs to be part of the specification of 262. And the intention or the hope would be that browser import maps would build then on top of that, you know, or would refactor to live on top of that. Similarly, any mapping mechanism Node had would hopefully also sit on top of that. It seems, regardless of what Node decides to do, now it seems like that is something that that you in particular may be interested in being involved in. I don't know the timeline. It's not likely to be soon, is my guess, but just wanted to share the relevance.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of, it is trying to work out what the contextualization is here, and you know, it is closely linked to built-in modules and the guarantees around the module system, and maybe it is an overreach to bring up the security concept. Sorry, I'll let it go back to the questions. Go for it.
Jeffrey's up, and then myself.
I was just going to ask, like, could we not implement import maps as a loader? And I don't know whatever happened to that effort to have like official Node packages, but I mean, I guess we could always implement it under a flag, which should be about the same thing as implementing it as a loader. But, or are you talking about like on a much earlier stage than that? Like you want to know if Node is interested in like having a representative in these discussions?
Right. It's more about like long-term investment in the platform and Node traditionally not having a voice in web standards and things like that, and as modules being something relatively fundamental, whether import maps and security concepts and things around that, is something where Node.js representation might make sense.
So I think this is a good place for me to interject. And then we've got Duran, and then we've got Wes. I was one of the people in the original meeting that came up with the original import map proposal, partially representing Node and partially representing thinking about how do we have bare imports as a JS ecosystem thing. So, Node has to an extent been represented at import maps from the initial discussions of the proposal, just to give that context. An update on where it's at right now. There's an implementation in Chrome that's behind a flag. It is right now part of the WICG, Web Incubator Community Group, and waiting to graduate. If it graduated, it would most likely move into the what working group HTML spec. The thing that's blocking it from moving right now is another implementer expressing public interest in implementation. There are no other browsers right now that have expressed public interest in implementation, although I have been pinging folks at different browsers to try to see if we can get them to do so. There currently is no work being done for integrity as part of the import map. I have a separate proposal that I've opened up at the WICG about the idea of a sub-resource integrity map. I personally am not a huge fan of trying to shove additional logic into this, into import maps at this time, as they are not, like, we don't even have any guarantee that long-term this will be a single manifest format. It's possible that the two could get merged, but like things need to happen one at a time. And my understanding is like the limited scope is looking to have browsers commit to the limited scope before trying to extend it. I think there is use in Node for import maps as they exist today, especially as a way of like kind of like pre-generating the entire resolution map for all of the specifiers so that you do not have to do the specifier resolution algorithm live. This is like kind of a production-like build step that one could do, for example. So I think even just the off-the-shelf map that we have can be useful. Jordan and Jeff, I believe that you had your hands up before. Were they still up to discuss again, or are they?
Oh, sorry, no.
Okay. So Duran and then Wes.
What I was trying to ask Guy on a private channel is basically what's the use case for import maps in Node? Because the way I see it, and I didn't know you participated in the creation, Miles, import map is this highly dynamic thing, and it makes a lot of sense in the browser context. And in Dino, it makes sense because they load models from the web dynamically. And Node traditionally, as far as I know, has no dynamic way to load models from the web. But if it does, then import maps make a whole lot of sense. As for other reasons, I can see stuff like A/B testing perhaps being done through that. I can see stuff like replacing log files like being done in the integrity suggestions. But it's really important to understand if it has, like, I'm excited about it, and I just don't know if Node needs it.
So the baseline proposal, to the best of my understanding, is not dynamic. It is a static mapping of a bare specifier on the left to a resource on the right. And at least for myself, whether or not that resource is like a file URL or a HTTPS URL doesn't seem like a major deal. And as far as Node is concerned, I still see value in having that static mapping pre-computed before load time. But like the fallback stuff was removed from the spec, to the best of my understanding, for what it's worth.
It exists in Deno as far as I... Oh, no, it doesn't. It wasn't implemented. Cool.
Wes?
So like import maps as they currently exist, like don't compose, right? You just have one import map for your final application, yes?
Yeah.
So that means import maps, if we supported them in some way in Node, wouldn't be able to be shipped with packages. You just have to like provide one on the command line to like override resolutions.
I would imagine that the way that it will work in Node is like when you ran npm install, it could generate an import map for the node modules folder that you have. You could almost even create a translation that could turn a package lock into an import map. You could then
Okay, so
provide that map directly to Node.
if you're
And
using it like that, then that's like a standardized version of like a yarn lock file or like a package lock file. Like both of those are things that the package managers have much stronger opinions on than a lot of us here do. We should probably be asking them, because that's definitely a feature pretty much for them, because we wouldn't be generating it, they would.
but we would
Just to-
have to consume it and enforce it.
Well, yeah,
Just to-
but if they can't consume something useful or they don't want to, that's matters a lot more than what we care about, because they're the ones who really matter.
I care about this, and I would advocate for this at NPM.
For what it's worth, I've been working on an import map package manager generator for 7 years personally. The other side of it is that policy does do these mappings, and policy does do these integrity locks similarly to a lock file. And the generation of policy is a current active problem. And the story around that, and I don't want to overconflate them. I'm not saying that we should unify them right now, but I do think that there are a lot of cross concerns between these systems. And yeah, but more generally, as I say, it's about like having the conversations and being involved in the conversations, because they do affect Node directly or indirectly.
Again, I think we're like one level removed from the stakeholders who would care the most about that, because we're not the people who maintain like the current formats in Node that essentially do the same thing.
So right now, the way in which we do things, we rely on the resolver to, in real time at runtime, resolve all these things, including package exports. So this is happening like, during the load phase and even during execution when we're dealing with dynamic imports. So the benefit that I see to Node is like essentially having a pass where you can go and resolve this once for your whole tree, especially when we're talking about like things being deployed in a serverless environment. I genuinely, and I could be wrong here, I don't have numbers to back it up, but I do think that we can see performance improvements by essentially making every single resolve call be an order one operation.
Although like, this is completely an aside. Weren't most of those like startup performance concerns supposed to be alleviatable just by capturing a startup snapshot just after the module graph is loaded and then just using that startup snapshot that you ship?
Possibly we don't necessarily have that shipped
there
right
are
now.
problems for that with native modules and native caching and stuff like that as well, possibly. I don't remember the details again. Probably Bradley would be the right person to be around for that conversation. And then one other thing just to mention briefly, we've hit sort of time, but I mean, Wesley, you mentioned loading multiple import maps. I guess the frustrations from me working on System.js and JSPM come out of things that like, I need multiple import maps and things like that are useful, and they're not being defined by browsers. So I've ended up putting together a whole bunch of extensions to import maps and extension proposals, like the ability to lazily load them and to extend them in a well-defined way. And the fact that it's only platforms that are actively adopting these kinds of workflows that are able to really work through those issues, and that maybe the browser isn't the best place to drive that.
So with that, we are at time. So I think that we need to call it a day for now and revisit this in 2 weeks. Everyone, thank you for joining. And those who dialed in, thanks for calling. I'm going to go ahead and stop the